Hall & Wilcox acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands on which this podcast is recorded. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people joining us today.
Hello and welcome to our latest episode of the Smarter Law Lawcast. I'm Alison Choi Flanagan, a partner at national law firm Hall & Wilcox, and I co-lead our health and care practice. I'm delighted to be your host for today's episode, and thank you for joining us. Today we'll be discussing whistleblowing under the new Aged Care Act and rules, which commence on 1 November. I'm joined by Nathan Luca, co-founder of Your Call Whistleblowing Solutions, and who is going to talk to you about some of his lived experience in providing whistleblowing services. Great to have you here, Nathan. Let's talk about your organisation. What's some of the things that you do and your organisation does in relation to whistleblowing?
Thanks for having me on the show, Alison. Your Call operates an external whistleblowing service where we have offices here in the office in Melbourne and also in Sydney and Brisbane, taking calls from individuals across sectors, with many in aged care, who are wanting to ask questions and ultimately determine if we're a suitable pathway for them to make a safe disclosure to their workplace. And in doing so, they receive a case manager at our side and they go through a fully externally managed reporting process with the intent of a empathetic, respectful and timely response under the policy or procedure that they've reported under with their employer.
So that means that, for example, if we've got many clients that are approved providers, they would enter into an agreement with your organisation and they would provide your number for staff and whistleblowers to call. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We also have online reporting, mail, email, SMS, if it's chosen. It's not chosen often, but we have the option, and in person. But hotline and online are the most popular. And it can be multifaceted. It can be under the whistleblowing laws or what we're about to talk about, the Aged Care Act, but it also may be in relation to grievances, underpayments. It really is determined by the organisation what conduct types can be reported.
Thanks, Nathan. And that could be really useful for some providers that they know about that service that you provide. And what other services do you provide? I know you provide something about systems to help approved providers comply with their whistleblowing obligations.
Yeah, so I was in the group who started Your Call for a decade now, which is a bit scary to say out loud. And in that time, we learned that receiving reports from individuals and being in the middle of the process, being an intermediary process where we're in the middle of the employer and the whistleblower to ensure that they're safe, that their anonymity can be retained, that they have agency and choice. We learned that's not everything. That's not the silver bullet that's going to solve the problem or the system issue that an organisation may experience across all types of matters or moments where people choose to speak up at an organisation. And a lot of the time, that happens direct to the organisation, straight to an authorised recipient, straight to HR. So the platform enables the Your Call service to operate and for the employer to receive cases and take them to conclusion, communicate with whistleblowers known or anonymous, but also set up workflows and processes that are managed in-house so they can have a hub of sorts of all employee relations, whistleblowing, hazards, and other matters for them to create great data analytics, comply with legislation, and ensure that the experience, irrespective of the intake pathway, is consistent.
So learning from that, I think approved providers really need to know or consider both external and internal avenues for whistleblowers to make complaints, and both external and internal avenues for staff to contact if they've got any questions, just so that the processes are followed, but also within their organisation, whether it's with your organisation or their own, that they have a process where when someone makes a whistleblowing complaint, it's recorded, it's provided to the appropriate person within the organisation to investigate, and that the investigation is recorded, and that where relevant, there's mandatory notifications, etc. Part of that for us as lawyers is to ensure that the processes are followed, but also where relevant, the information is kept confidential, because that's one of the key components of whistleblowing. and also that there is no disadvantage to the whistleblower for the fact that they've made a complaint. They're the two main components of whistleblowing. One, that the information must be kept confidential, and secondly, there can be no detriment by the fact of someone making a complaint.
It's a great point, Alison, and it's something we talk about a lot with our customers as well. No doubt you do as well. Irrespective of how strong the brand is of an external reporting service like Your Call, for example, people don't come to work and then just say, I'm going to speak up today, and thank goodness there's Your Call, and I'll speak up I'm really safe now and I'll make a report. We would love that to happen, being our business, but that's not in reality how it happens. Someone comes to work and makes a decision to speak up based on all of their entire employee experience. And a lot of that that contributes to that is their internal experience, as you've mentioned, and then they choose the pathway thereafter. So taking a holistic approach and jumping outside just the policy, but making sure that the authorised officers are robust, that the communication is on point, that the experience is consistent, that is all relational to a high quality and functioning system. So right on the money there.
What I talk about to our approved provider clients is that culture is really important to corporate and clinical governance. And when we do audits for our clients, quite often I'll go in and interview people from 5 levels of the organisation, from the director to C-suite to a facility manager to a aged care worker. And I'll ask them, tell me something that's gone wrong in the last 6 months, and they'll tell me whatever it is. And I said, how did the organisation respond to that? And if the organisation said, your comments were taken into account, we valued them, we put in improvement processes, we reported back to you how we did it, that's an indication of good corporate governance and good culture. Whereas if the person comes back and said, I reported something 6 months and nothing was done about it, I'm very unhappy with it, worst case, I'm too scared to say anything because I'm scared that I'll lose my job, that is easily an example of that there's a problem within the organisation, because if an organisation doesn't know of a problem, it can't fix it. And ultimately that can lead to unsafe practices. And at the end of the day, the best thing is you want the organisation to be somewhere where you'd send your own grandparents to.
That's exactly right. That's really interesting. That perception gap, no doubt, that you may have determined as well through all the layers would be illuminating, no doubt, for leaders where they're measuring the alignment of their intent with the employee experience. That would be quite shocking for some to realise how different that's felt at the employee level. Yeah, interesting.
And in my past, like personally, I've felt scared to say things. So I do have some empathy for that. And really, when we're talking about whistleblowing, that is actually the essence of it, isn't it? The whistleblowing policy is to make sure that, particularly in aged care, that the aged care residents' clients are safe. And in order to do that, people should be able to raise their complaints in a safe environment.
Exactly right.
That if we keep the essence of mind in front of mind, then we turn to actually what the legislation says. And it's quite a big shift, because whistleblowing whilst some companies that are large companies or public companies limited by guarantee, because they're public companies or large proprietary companies, they previously had to have whistleblowing systems in place under the Corporations Act. But the other organisations didn't. And from 1 November, every aged care provider is required under the new Aged Care Act and rules to have a statutory whistleblowing system. And it's not just a policy that you put into the drawer and forget about. It is actually an entire system. And some of the components of that is that the organisation must welcome anonymous oral or written disclosures to any aged care worker. So that's new. So under the Corporations Act, it wasn't to any aged care worker, responsible person of the approved provider or the approved provider itself. The complaint can be made orally or in writing. And if they make it orally, the person that receives the complaint should do a file note so that they keep a record of it. And the obligation is to protect the confidentiality of the disclosure and any person named in the disclosure. And that means not being very careful. If you receive a whistleblowing complaint, you need to know who to report that to and not tell everyone or and sundry that it's come in. It's really important not to gossip. I know that
that's right.
happens. You just can't do it under this legislation. The information must be handled securely, and identities must only be revealed if required by law or with the consent. And you must provide active support and fair treatment to the discloser and anyone at risk of detriment. Do you want to add to that? Oh, you've got to publish your whistleblowing policy. We'll talk about that later. And the whistleblowing system must be reviewed at a minimum annually. So we've been currently doing a lot of work looking at whistleblowing policies for clients. If you haven't updated your whistleblowing policy, you must do it ASAP. And you also must have compulsory training for workers. Nathan, do you want to talk a bit about what does it mean to provide active support and fair treatment and your lived experience in providing that?
Yeah, thanks, Alison. It's really interesting. We were speaking with a well-known aged care provider, their CEO, and it was described as this is wider doors but weaker shields, and how important that culture and systems will need to fill the gap to make sure that the added complexity, albeit that it's more inclusive, really stands up and ensures that protection is provided and that individuals know what to do if they are approached. And you've mentioned gossip. That is by far the leading reason for confidentiality breaches. Never really maliciously conducted, but just in the normal course of being a team member, things get out, so they'll glad you raised that. In terms of operationalizing this, I guess compliance is the floor, and you could look at it like psychological safety and being trauma informed is the ceiling. So making sure that there's fair treatment is moving away from seeing whistleblowing as a risk or a risk channel and seeing it more as an intelligence and support system. Focus and the emphasis on rights and accountability means that the tone set from the top matters more than ever. And ensuring that there are systems in place to support people to speak up and to do so in a way that opens up to choice, that is safe, and doesn't cause detriment. So that creates some complexity, some capacity issues, and some culture issues. And there's a range of ways. There's no answer you and I could give today on this podcast that will cover all the points, but obviously training is a big part of this process. But so is ensuring that training can come to life in the moment, that folks who get approached with someone wanting to make a whistleblower report can easily access a guide or a system like ours or other systems that are in place in an organisation where they can be guided through the steps, the key information capture that's required, the support services that are in place that the person can take action, how to connect that person to potentially remain anonymous throughout the journey, despite that person who's taking the report by proxy may obviously know who they are, keeping them safe and anonymous, but still connecting them for ongoing communication with the authorised recipients. There's a lot here, but time needs to be put in place in ensuring that can be understood, trained, and then delivered in a consistent fashion to ensure fair treatment is guaranteed, basically. We're seeing folks align their thinking to ISO 37002 as well. So there are core themes out of that we're seeing folks place here, like a whistleblower committee. And some of the other types of themes from that ISO guideline, they're using here as well, respond, and to ensure that there's proper oversight, proper feedback and reporting, and ensuring that the board or the relevant people at the organisation kept up to date with happenings, feedback from those who speak up, and ensuring that they're fulfilling their obligations.
Some of the work that we're doing in this area is working with clients to review position descriptions and making sure that the obligations are covered within the different position descriptions. So, for example, who is your chief whistleblowing officer? Who is responsible for implementing this? Which board committee is responsible for overseeing it? Is it the risk and management, risk committee, risk and audit committee, or another committee, HR committee? And also ensuring who's the chief investigator officer. If you're an aged care worker and someone does a whistleblowing complaint to you, it's not your job to do the investigation.
No,
it is your job to, with empathy, record what the complaint is and report it to the correct person within the organisation. And then that investigator should take that complaint on its face and deal with it fairly. So what does that mean? For example, quite often when someone makes a complaint against another person, that person can be defensive. And so rather than listening to the complaint, they make all types of excuses. Fair treatment means recording the complaint, dealing with it appropriately. So that means appropriately investigating it. And when you investigate it, you base it on the evidence before you. So you might take statements, you might look at the documentation. You don't deal with innuendo or gossip. And also you implement continuous improvement. And then I think, to be fair, provide feedback. Because what happens is that if people make a complaint and they never hear about it and they're very passionate about it, they're going to complain outside. And under the whistleblowing system, they are entitled to complain outside. Actually, you're required to tell them that they can complain outside, whether it's the Aged Care Quality Safety Commission or HCCC or etc. But really, it's much better for the organisation if you can deal with the complaint internally rather than it go externally.
Yeah, that's right. How are you finding the response to the difference in the reverse onus of proof between the Aged Care Act and the Corporations Act? Some are interpreting that as a hindrance to fair treatment because potentially you could see it as the whistleblower's perspective. Their path to remedy is steeper because they must prove not just the disclosure plus detriment, but also causation or other things without the assistance, the structural assistance of a reverse burden. Is that being discussed? How do you think that impacts?
To explain what you're talking about, under the Aged Care Act, people can make a complaint under the Aged Care Act and the whistleblowing provisions, and the organisation is required to investigate that complaint fairly. If there is a breach of the Aged Care Act, then there could be fines or penalties against the approved provider, but also there can be fines and penalties against responsible persons or potentially banning orders against responsible persons and aged care workers. The Corporations Act is different in that the section under the Corporations Act, which is section 1317AD, a person can make a complaint, a whistleblowing complaint, and they have to provide evidence to suggest a reasonable possibility of the matters that are complained about. Once they do that, the approved provider must have the onus of proving that the claim is not made out. So it's not complete reversal of onus, because in that case, the complainant must provide sufficient evidence to suggest a reasonable possibility. But then once they do that, the company has the onus of proving that the claim is not made out, and that's the difference. That's a very long answer to your question.
No, it's a great answer, and I think it highlights how important it is to properly understand the differences, the overlaps, etc., and then articulate that to individuals who are impacted by it. And that's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, let's talk about the dual pathway. So when someone makes a complaint, they have 3 pathways. They can make a complaint under the Corporations Act. That complaint must be made to certain people who are authorised to provide whistleblowing, to accept whistleblowing complaints. It's not every aged care worker, but it would be, for example, the board or the whistleblower officer of the organisation. And those complaints are usually to do with things like inappropriate conduct of the company, fraud, embezzlement, etc. Under the Aged Care Act, the whistleblowing provisions are for breaches of the Aged Care Act, which can include, for example, care. Now, for example, if I was the daughter of a resident in an aged care facility, I can make a complaint under the whistleblowing stream, and under that complaint, I'm entitled to make a complaint. I'm entitled to have my confidentiality protected, and I'm entitled to not suffer detriment for making that complaint. But that means that the organisation must keep my identity confidential, and so I won't be necessarily involved in the management of that complaint. I will be sitting to one side, and they will do the investigation and come back to me. The other pathway under the Aged Care Act is to make a complaint under the Aged Care Act without going through the whistleblower mechanism. And so therefore my identity will be known as part of the investigation. But that allows me to, for example, sit in a case conference, because what happens is when a family member makes a complaint, it's much better for the approved provider to arrange a meeting with the resident, if they've got capacity, their children or the complainant, the family, the medical practitioners, the allied health practitioners, and have what we call a case conference. So everyone sits in the room, and it's really good for the family members to hear a word from the medical practitioners, for example, if the resident has difficult behaviours, for example, why these arrangements are in place. That can't occur in relation to the whistleblower stream, where the family member complainant is it must be held in confidence. So when someone makes a complaint under the Aged Care Act, it would be a requirement for all aged care workers to be able to understand the 3 different pathways and explain to the complainant which pathway they want to go. They can choose multiple pathways, but it's difficult to either be disclosed as your identity or confidential all at once, and then let them choose which complaint they want to go through. How do you think that would work in practice with your organisation, Nathan?
It's really interesting. So it's a big step forward. It's obviously making speaking up easier, safer, and more productive, and giving people choice. It's been really well received and embraced on our side with providers. What we're seeing them set up is no different to how they've prepared for whistleblowing. They've just broadened the streams that an individual can go through, and they're codifying workflows within it and processes. So first and foremost, they're informing the Your Call team on the rules, the processes, the information to share to families if they call, and providing examples of what would be appropriate in certain contexts, which pathway they should go down. So we're helping folks make informed decisions and providing them with literature and potentially internal contact points for further consultation should they need it to make an informed decision at the start. So not just a cookie cutter approach, which I guess is what was occurring previously. So that's fantastic. Once the person's made the choice, we may or may not be involved, obviously. If they choose a path that is outside of Your Call's remit, the potentially complaint feedback path. However, the software is still utilised by the teams or persons involved in that process once it's triggered to follow information, documentation, follow the right processes, and hopefully reach a resolution. And then use all of that information for intelligence, for program improvements and reporting. So it's made the platform more relevant and I guess broader and has more depth to it than just a simplified information capture, create a case and manage it. So now it's more dynamic and accommodating different use cases. It's really exciting.
Is there anything else you want to add in relation to whistleblowing, Nathan?
Other than the overlap between the Corporations Act and the Aged Care Act, which people are wrapping their heads around on that, nothing too much. The spirit of speaking up is the same. And that's something that hasn't changed, obviously, which is making sure we don't just rely on the code itself or a policy document. Culture and process needs to bring these things alive and make them operate properly at the organisation. So from an intent and the spirit of the legislation, being empathetic, being human-centred and informed, taking into account intersectionality, cultural safety and other elements through the reporting journey, but also when you conduct a risk for detriment and make other types of decisions throughout the process to ensure fair treatment, ensuring the right people are in the right roles and the right support is tailored and provided. And then ensuring that the folks that are receiving reports and all interact are well trained and contributing to in harmony to a system. So more communication is better than less, and showing that you've got what we call on our side a listening ecosystem. And the result of that is people choosing to speak up safely and good early resolutions, hopefully. The law hasn't really changed that. But if you use that as your compass and ensure that you comply with the law, in our experience, you're going to have a robust program and a strong culture.
And also it's useful when there's an external person that's dealing with a complaint. They're just one step apart. There's less emotion to it. That can be helpful sometimes as well.
Yeah, that's right. I think it meets the person where they are. Like I said at the top of the chat, we don't think that there's a silver bullet. We don't think Your Call is the only solution, or an external reporting pathway is the only solution, or internal is the only solution. It's important about meeting the person where they are and giving them choice. And if it's appropriate, having an external person that you have You get to know, you know their name, you feel safe and confident. They help you build up the courage. You come forward, and then we're with you every moment of the way as you go through the resolution. That can be really helpful in a time of need.
And sometimes when I act for approved providers, there's serial complainants as well. So that can be very challenging. Most of the people provide genuine complaints, but then there's people that can be very difficult and genuine. So in some cases,
yes.
And in that case, sometimes you do need to get appropriate legal advice, but also having that external whistleblowing route also can save harassment of staff in some cases as well. That's my experience.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and as you may know, and we know, it's a very low percentage of reports fall into that category, but they obviously occur. Us, and I'm sure other providers, have ways of balancing that out. Obviously, care, respect, and empathy for the person and taking them through a well-structured, human-centric process. But at the same time, we're all licensed investigators. We have lawyers in the team, and we need to balance the two things. We need to balance information capture, robust statements, when I'm using that word in relation to what the client would receive, and ensure that we go through a rigorous process of understanding what happened, and also potentially rerouting them back to the organisation, giving them time to think and come back with new information, and helping clients to make informed decisions. So it's a real balancing act between the two.
Thanks. And thank you for the conversation. Thanks, Nathan. Some great insights, and I'm sure our listeners will take a lot away from today's discussion. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. If you've got any questions or want to chat more about anything we've covered, feel free to get in touch. You can find out our details at hollandwilcox.com.au or connect with us on LinkedIn. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please rate, review, or subscribe whenever you get your podcasts. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
This podcast is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should always obtain legal advice about your specific circumstances.